Hi, everybody. Welcome to the webinar. We have a lot of people logging in right now, so we're going to give it just one more minute here for folks to join in, and then we will go ahead and get started. So just sit back for another minute or so, and then we'll go ahead and get going. All right. It's nice to see everybody logging in. This has been a really popular topic for us recently, and we are seeing a lot of people join in on the NetSuite ecosystem, both new names to Celigo, a lot of our existing customers, and hopefully, since we know how popular Excel is for NetSuite users, that everyone will learn something from this webinar. I wanted to welcome everybody. This is the Excel Lover's Guide to Working with NetSuite Data. And for most of you who are inside of NetSuite ecosystem, I would guess that you were already familiar, at least in name, with Celigo. So Celigo is, for those who aren't familiar, is an integration platform so that you can quickly connect applications to NetSuite and beyond. We have the premier smart connectors. These are the pre-built integrations, the most popular integrations between things like Salesforce and NetSuite, Salesforce and Shopify. We are vertical agnostic. We have connected to just about everything you can imagine in terms of the banking integrations, cash application manager, vendor payment manager, EDI, 3PL, Amazon FBA. So we're very, very well known inside of the NetSuite ecosystem. And what's happened over the last few years is that we have also had a couple what we would consider these productivity integrations, particularly with Excel and Outlook and the G Suite of products that they have been so popular that we actually have spun out a standalone subsidiary brand for dealing specifically with those, which is CloudExtend by Celigo. So wanted to introduce you to the two individuals who are going to be running this webinar. They are, I would say, absolutely the experts in terms of how best to work with NetSuite data and Excel, and really driving this those learnings into the product that's being used. So Chris Corcoran is the general manager of CloudExtend. And Justine Berto is our wonderful account executive who many of you have already talked to in the past, also for the CloudExtend brand. So it's my honor to hand it off to them, and we will be taking questions throughout this webinar. If you do have questions, just type it into the chat on the GoToWebinar control panel, and we will address those either as we go or definitely at the end for Q&A. And for those of you who are here, there will be also a special promo code if you do go into CloudExtend.io and try the products and purchase before the end of the month. So it's my honor to hand it off to you, Chris.
Awesome. Great. Thanks, Rico, and welcome, everyone. Just a little bit of history on CloudExtend, and this is really current. So as we created this separate brand at Celigo called CloudExtend, everyone on our team really wakes up with a laser focus on making working with your ERP or CRM system a lot easier, with a big emphasis on the NetSuite ecosystem. That's really where we grew up. We've built applications that enable end users to integrate their email, their calendars, and their documents with NetSuite. We call this CloudExtend Outlook for NetSuite. We also have CloudExtend G Suite for NetSuite. And we launched the CloudExtend Excel for NetSuite to really help overcome some of the pain points that are common when working in a web-based UI, such as NetSuite's. Every day we help over 5,000 customers, but we're not resting on our laurels. You can go to our support site, support.cloudextend.io. navigate to one of the products, and you'll see that we're pushing lots of updates. We have generally at least one release every single month, some of them with major improvements and others with just kind of under the hood improvements. But everything we do with the intent of making our customers' lives easier when working with their ERP or CRM system. So with that introduction, I'm going to turn it over to Justine, and then I'll be back periodically to do a couple of demos along the way.
Awesome, thanks, Chris. So we have a lot of great content to review, so let's jump right into it. I'll apologize in advance. I have been speaking fast and getting yelled at for it since elementary school, so I'm going to try to slow it down for this webinar. But as Rico said, please feel free to ask questions in the chat, and we'll get to all those questions later on. So a quick run through of the agenda today. We already did our introduction, and after that, we're gonna run through some common pain points with a web-based UI. From there, we'll discuss how Excel fits in and how it can help with those pain points. Then we will review some alternatives to the CSV imports. We'll review some typical use cases, then we'll open up for a Q&A session, and lastly, we'll discuss our promotion that we have going on. So common pain points. So NetSuite's a great ERP system. I personally have been working forever in NetSuite, so I can attest to the fact that like working in any other web-based UI, updating existing data or adding new records can be painful at times. Some examples, and again, feel free to chime in by typing in the chat your particular pain points, but some examples that we've heard of from colleagues, we've come across ourselves, etc., are updating multi-line transactions. Maybe that's a large journal entry, a sales order, a transfer order, etc. It can be time-consuming and flat out annoying at times to line by line update a particular field or fields at once. Creating or updating large number of records, another pain point I'm sure many of you have experienced. Using formulas to change field values is just not possible in the UI. Finding other ways to get data out of Excel instead of the CSV export, and automated integrations with other systems. So at this point, Chris, I'm going to hand it over to you, and Chris is going to give us kind of a real-life example of a transaction that would be difficult to update in the UI.
Okay, great. Thanks, Justine. In a second, I'll be able to share my screen. I think if someone can pass me controls, that'd be great. Okay. Perfect. So on my screen now, I am showing a NetSuite journal entry. And this is a really common use case we hear from accountants. So everyone's busy during the day. You can save a journal entry and then all of a sudden realize that you've forgotten to enter a specific field. So in this case, say the department field. So this poor accountant's gone through and updated 100 lines, saved the journal entry. Excuse me, there's no way to actually go back through a CSV import or any other process to update the department field. So you'd have to come in and edit the journal entry. You can't even click here to go down to the next line. So you've got to kind of click somewhere in the next line, then come over to the next one, set the department, et cetera, and then go through all 100 of these rows. And then go ahead and click Save once you're done. So that's just a small example just to kind of illustrate one of the talking points that Justine had. And it would take about 15 minutes to go through 100 or 200 lines in a particular transaction and then update that through the NetSuite UI. So just a real quick point just to illustrate some of these pain points. Okay, Justine, back to you.
Okay, cool. Okay, and everyone should be seeing my screen now. So common reasons for using Excel. So why, generally speaking, would someone want to work in Excel? Here are just a few I've heard, and again, feel free to type in some of your reasons why you love Excel. The first being, basically everyone knows Excel, well, mostly everyone, and people are really familiar with using it. I'll give a special shout out to all the accountants on the call. I know you guys particularly are huge fans. I work with a lot of accountants who use our application, so I know you guys love working in Excel. It's fast and it's formula driven, which makes working in Excel a tremendous time saver. And with Excel's robust analytics, anything is really possible. And lastly, there are fewer UI limitations when working directly in Excel. So a typical Excel to NetSuite workflow looks something like this. Basically, if you're using the CSV import tool, this is what you're looking at here. So you are going to first open up Excel, then assemble the data into rows, perform your calculations if you have them, save it as a CSV file, log into NetSuite, navigate to the CSV imports page, upload your file, map your fields, import your data. Nope, still not done yet. Monitor the queue for job status, If there's errors, you're going to need to export the error file, then fix the errors and repeat the import. So Chris, I'm now going to hand it back to you. And if you can do just a quick demo of a typical CSV import, that would be fantastic.
Sure, good. Thanks, Justine. And I know some of you, may have come here to see our own application and our own solution, but there's also a lot of people on this call that may just want to learn about, the native NetSuite CSV import process. I'll make this fairly quick for those of you that are familiar with this, and for those that aren't, there's plenty of tutorials online on how to do this. In this particular case, I want to create 2 sales orders. So I've assembled all the data that I need in advance in a CSV file, and this is saved as a CSV file, so I couldn't save it again if I had multiple worksheets on this workbook. And the data is pretty much ready with one kind of hiccup that I'm going to introduce. And then to be fair, I'm going to introduce the same hiccup a little later when I show how to do this process with our own application. So I've got one item here that's going to throw an error during this upload. So if I flip over to NetSuite, once I've got my CSV file created, the process is you're going to go to Setup, and then Import Export, and then Import CSV Records. Now from here, you need to choose what type of import it's going to be. So in this case, it's transactions. And now I've got a list of transactions that I can choose from. So I want to choose sales order because that's the record that I want to create. Here, I'm going to select the file that's stored somewhere on my desktop. So I'll go ahead and double click on that file, and then I'll hit Next. And here I'm given the choice as to whether I want to add data, update data, or do what's called an upsert, which would be a combination. I'll go ahead and click Next again here. Now NetSuite does a really nice job. This is kind of surprising here. They've really been able to map some of those column names over to their best guess as far as the column name over in NetSuite. They've gotten everything right here with one exception, which is the external ID, and that's a required field when you're importing a sales order. So I'll go ahead here and I'll put in the external ID. And that might be, say, like the sales order from an external system that you're importing from, maybe a website, a customer may have sent something over, etc. So I'm going to go ahead and click on Next. And I'm going to go ahead down here now, and I'm just going to click on Save and Run. Actually, I'll just go ahead and click on, Save and Run. Give it a name first. Now here I'm going to be brought to a dashboard where I can monitor my jobs. So you can see here that the job is 0% of the way complete, and I'll click refresh. It's 50% of the way complete and probably be 100% by this time. So as expected, we got one sales order imported successfully. The second one was not imported successfully. But at this point, we really don't know which one was completed successfully. Well, we all kind of do because we saw what we were doing there, but in any event, so now we've got to actually download that CSV file to see what the errors are. So I'm going to go ahead and open that file. And then here, you can see that NetSuite is telling us that there's an invalid item for the reference key Gibber. So that's this particular item here. So I would have to come in here and then put in the right item number and then go back through that upsert process or the update process to create this new sales order. So that's really some of the pain points kind of illustrated here that you see with the NetSuite CSV import process. And we'll talk later about how we handle some of those pain points. Okay, Justine, back to you.
Okay, great. Okay, sorry about that. Okay. So as Chris just demonstrated, you could see that CSV is definitely a tool that can help. But with that said, there are some problems that we've heard from customers who frequently use the CSV import process. And some of those are listed below, including that CSV does not support all record types. The data cannot be validated prior to upload. It only accepts CSV files, which can be frustrating to those who have multiple worksheets, as Chris mentioned. Anytime there's errors, it returns a separate error file, and it's only one way, so Excel to NetSuite and not vice versa. So I'm going to let Chris take it over from here and kind of review, give you a little bit overview of CloudExtend and how our application can help. So Chris, you can take it from here.
Okay, great. Thanks, Justine. I'll share my screen in just a second, but meanwhile, here's how we solve some of the pain points. Recognizing that there's pain points in a web-based UI is really pretty easy. It's obvious to most of us, but solving the problem is really the difficult part. So fortunately for us, we've got a lot of really smart people working at CloudExtend that spend their entire workday solving these problems. So we built this solution to allow users to start and finish in Excel without having to log into the NetSuite UI. In other words, we've taken out many of the steps that you saw in that CSV process, and we combined them into Excel, and then we made it better by enabling data to move both ways. So you can pull data into Excel, and you can push data from Excel back up to NetSuite. And as far as getting data into Excel, we give you plenty of options. There's really 3 ways to bring data in. You can reference an internal ID. You can use our own data filter that's built right in Excel to limit the data that's coming in, or you can reference a pre-built save search. One important point that I do want to make is that our app does not require that your company purchase advanced analytics or any kind of an ODBC driver from NetSuite or a third party. We use native NetSuite web services. That's free. It's typically included with your NetSuite account, so there's no extra expense on the NetSuite side to use our application. So having everything in real Excel instead of just in a CSV file, it allows customers to build repeatable solutions and really cool ones. Excuse me. I just love getting on calls with customers and then seeing what they've built. We have one company that sells decking material, and they use Excel to calculate items and pricing based on the size of a deck. So in a typical scenario, the sales rep will use Excel. They'll input certain deck parameters such as the length, the number of railings, type of wood or composite materials, etc. And then when all that data is entered, they just click a button that runs a macro inside of Excel, and then that macro takes every item and adds it to what we call a CloudExtend Excel quote template. And then each item is priced just right. All the quantities are calculated right down to the last finishing screw. And then they can push that update right up to NetSuite. And then if they ever need to make changes to that data, remember I said we can make data go round trip, they can pull that quote back down into Excel and then make changes to whether it's 10 lines, 50 lines, 100 lines, etc. So in the CSV example we saw earlier, we saw what happens when data can't be validated in advance. And to solve that problem, we built a real-time lookup for pick list fields. And this really greatly reduces the number of errors that could occur during an upload because we catch them in advance. But even then, there's from time to time, you will encounter an error when you upload data to NetSuite. And we actually show that error message directly in Excel. So you don't need to export another file and then re-import that through a CSV import process. Just solve the error right there in that particular cell. And then with our app, there's an update button. Just click update one more time. Now, we also improved on native NetSuite CSV export process because we allow users to stream save searches directly into Excel. So this bypasses the manual process that's normally there where you have to run a save search, export a CSV file, and then save it. And then if you want to link that up with other analytics and have charts and graphs, et cetera, that are updated, you've got to copy and paste that data into your larger workbook that has multiple worksheets, et cetera. And by the way, I should mention, and we'll talk about this at the end of the call, this reporting component that I'm talking about right now is actually free for all users. So you can go to cloudextend.io, start a trial, install the app. We'll help you, nurture you through the trial for 14 days. But if after the end you don't need that upsert capability, you can use our app at no charge to pull your NetSuite save searches directly into Excel. So with that, I'm going to go through a couple of use cases. So if I can share my screen here. The first thing I'm going to do is pull in that journal entry that we saw before. So I'm going to load our application here is loaded in the sidebar, and we've got plenty of tutorials, et cetera. When you start a trial, we give you lots of help. So I won't go into a lot of detail on explaining how this works, but essentially we use templates that map Excel to NetSuite. They're really super, super easy to build. I mentioned before there were 3 ways to pull data into NetSuite, into Excel from NetSuite. I'm going to use one of them here. I happen to know the internal ID for the journal entry I want to edit. So I'm going to go ahead and click on the refresh action item. This is going to go out to NetSuite, and it's going to pull in all 100 rows from that journal entry, and then it's going to allow me to make edits directly here inside of Excel, and then push those changes back up to NetSuite. So we saw earlier that this journal entry didn't have a department field. So we're going to now populate that department field. And when I click in the department field over here, it activates something called a pick list field, which is just like a drop-down field inside NetSuite. So here we're seeing the valid values that we can choose from. Because we're using Excel, this is what I love. You saw before in NetSuite, we had to go tab from row to row to row to row. With our application, you don't need to do that. So once I've got all the information that I need here filled out, I just simply click the update icon inside of our toolbar. And then when the update is successful, it'll color this internal ID 70618 in green. And it'll also return a message over here indicating that the update was successful. And then we'll flip back over to NetSuite. I'll refresh that screen in NetSuite, and we'll see that the department was changed over to admin. So there's the success messages. Go ahead here and click on refresh. And there you can see the department field was updated. So in probably a minute and a half or so, we're able to save someone 15 to 20 minutes of time. So I'm going to go through another example here, which, so this is an example that we just showed with a journal entry where you've got one pain point, which is an entry with multiple lines. Now we're going to show the ability to import multiple transactions at once. So in this case, earlier you saw I had a CSV file already prepped for import to NetSuite with a native NetSuite CSV process. I've got something similar here using a sales order template for our application. So I'm going to push this data, excuse me, up to NetSuite as well. But I also wanted to make sure that we force an error here as well. So I'm going to just make this item here gibberish. Now you're going to see over here, I'm actually also using a formula field. So that's a nice thing about using real Excel. So I'm pulling in these prices based on a lookup table that I have. And that lookup table allows me to calculate prices. I could even look at quantities. So if I have different quantities, I could change the price. Just some of the beauties of using real Excel as opposed to a CSV file. Now we also I talked a little bit earlier before about real-time validation. So you can see that gibberish is now highlighted. We've gone out to NetSuite already and verified that this is not a valid value. So the smart thing to do here would be to fix it before you push the update. But just to show how we handle errors, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to just push and try and create both of these sales orders at the same time. So we should theoretically see that one sales order gets created just like it did in the NetSuite process with CSV imports. And then we're going to have a second sales order that fails to be created. And we'll also have that same error message return that's saying gibberish is not a valid value. But the process to actually resolve these errors is much, much more efficient. And we tell you what's happening here in the background. So we've already sent this data up to NetSuite, and we're just waiting for NetSuite to actually create these records for us. And then you'll see in a second that it's going to say, update is complete, and it will return the internal IDs that are created when the order is processed for successful entries, and then it's going to list in red for any errors, for any orders that are not successfully created. So here we go. It's telling us gibberish isn't valid, so this is pretty common sense right here. I can come in here, and I think this is like a 19-inch wheel, so I can just type 19, and this is going to give me every item that has the word 19 in it, so it's that particular wheel. And if I wanted to, in the interest of time, I won't push this back, but I could just click the update icon and then send this one record back. So thinking about the CSV process that required that we export the error file, resolve the error, and then go through that whole cycle again of importing the file, this really does save a lot of time. Okay, Justine, with that, I think I'll pass it back to you.
Okay, great.
Hopefully you guys are typing in your questions along the way.
Sorry, I was muted there for a second. So thanks, Chris. That was a great job at showing how CloudExtend shines. We also want to talk a little bit about reporting. So you may have these saved searches in NetSuite, but you want to do more with the data. So NetSuite dashboards are one way to see your data, and using Excel is another. One huge benefit of using Excel is you can then share your data and visualizations with non-NetSuite users. So here are some reporting options. So you have the NetSuite dashboards, as I mentioned. You have the export to CSV. You can connect to external tools like ODBC driver, but if anyone is familiar with that, you know that that can be pricey. And then you can also use CloudExtend Excel for NetSuite, as Chris also spoke about a few minutes ago. And I think, Chris, if you could share your screen now so we can kind of showcase how our reporting engine works, that would be great.
Sure thing. I'll go ahead and share my screen here. Okay, and I also want to highlight, that I'm working in the same Excel workbook with multiple worksheets. So this is not a CSV file, so we don't have those CSV limitations. And I got these charts and these pivot tables out of one saved search that lives in this NetSuite account. So basically, it's a list of sales by quarter over a historical period of time, also charted as well, and then totaled up here and then broken down by item here. So in order to get this information, I have a save search that lives inside of NetSuite, but rather than going through the normal NetSuite process of running the search, exporting as a CSV, and then copying and pasting here to update the data that's associated with my information, my analytics, I can just simply rerun that save search. So I'm going to click the menu icon. I'm going to go to Save Searches. First thing you need to do is figure out what kind of a save search it is. So in this case, it's a transaction-based save search. So once I click on transaction, it's going to give me a list of all my transaction-based save searches in NetSuite, and I can narrow that down by typing sales orders, and this is the search that I want. So I'm going to go ahead and click on download as raw data, and I'll explain download data into a template in just a second. So when I click download as raw data, it's going to overwrite the data that was there, and then it's going to just stream that NetSuite save search directly into Excel. So that's done. It's pretty fast. That's complete. Now all my pivot tables, charts, etc., I can just come in here. They can be refreshed, and they'll be associated with the most recent data. So before we saw, we saw two options. We saw the option to stream data directly into NetSuite, into Excel as raw data, and then we also saw the option to stream data in as a template. If you chose the template option, it will build a table for you linked back to NetSuite, so you could take that same search, make changes to the data, and then push that information back up to NetSuite. Just a word of caution, it is a little slower because we've got to pull in lots of metadata associated with the fields on that save search, so you know we can validate them through the pick list, et cetera, ahead of time. So for pure reporting purposes, essentially what I just did here, you can do for free with our application forever. Okay, Justine, I think back to you, and then I'll go through some other remarks here.
Okay, great.
So I think it's also important, much as we'd really love to sell you CloudExtend Excel for NetSuite or make you familiar with other options such as CSV, import, there are times when our great solution is not necessarily meant for you. And these are a few that I could think of. So if you're looking for a real hands-off approach with automation, such as sending orders to a warehouse or a third-party logistics site, then you're probably going to be more productive by automating that data transfer, something that our application doesn't do. Also, if you're exporting order information from say your website or Amazon, you can certainly use our app to get that information. Some customers with a small budget will license our app. They'll export their data as a CSV file, and then they'll import it to create sales orders. But honestly, that's not super efficient because usually time's of the essence, especially with Amazon, where you could be penalized for not shipping items on time, et cetera. So because our app requires that manual intervention, I think that's also a good case for looking into other options. And then last, we do use NetSuite's web services, which doesn't cost our users any extra money. You don't have to pay NetSuite any extra fees for that. It's really robust, allows us to do things like send back confirmations to Excel, validate the pick list, but it's really not ideal for uploading massive amounts of data. So if you're, say, a brand new NetSuite user and you're going to upload thousands of or tens of thousands of customer records and 1 million items, this is probably not the best tool for you. On the next slide, I could certainly talk about some other options that would be available that I would recommend. So here's a few that, that I'd recommend instead of CloudExtend or the native CSV upload tool. So earlier, Rico mentioned Celigo's smart connectors and our iPaaS integrator.io. This, to me, is an ideal option for customers that want to automate their integrations. With a pre-built connector, customers could be up and running with an Amazon or Shopify integration, usually in less than a day. If you need something more than a pre-built connector, so you need to integrate with something we haven't built, a connector for that you just install out of the box, then I recommend our iPass. You can further enhance your pre-built connectors with that, or you can even build your own integrations. I've used it myself to build integrations between Salesforce and NetSuite. I'm not a power user, and I was able to get some flows up and running in just a few hours. So it's really intuitive. It's really a modern design. There's also a free trial, and then even better, once you build your first flow, you can actually run that flow free forever as well. So really some cool things coming out of that side of the house. Also, with Integrator.io is something called a data loader, and that's also free, and that supports more record types than NetSuite CSV import tool. It doesn't do certain things like our app does, like return error messages directly inside of the application, but it's really good if you need to work with massive amounts of data. So if you're pushing, millions of items and you want to send those changes back up to NetSuite, it's a really good tool with a really great dashboard for monitoring your integrations. And although it's not on this slide, I do just kind of want to highlight, what we're building next as well. I mentioned earlier that we do release regular monthly updates with improvements, some visible and some behind the scenes. And right now, we've got our top engineers working on an overhaul to the entire application with a big focus on making it even more usable and giving it even more performance. So just as a quick example, you saw earlier I downloaded a journal entry. I had to go ahead and load the template, and then I had to initiate the download button. Well, when you're done with a certain process like that, we're going to ask if that's something you want to save as a repeatable action. And if it is, you just essentially click a button, and it'll show up there for you so that next time you want to do it, you just click one button, and then the table will load, the journal will download, etc. So repeatable actions is something that's coming that's really, really cool. And then we're also adding support for more record types as well, something we're constantly doing. But the biggest change coming is that users will be able to upload, even, I'm not going to say millions of records, but, will be kind of closer to data loader, and that you'll be able to really upload a pretty massive amount of data. And we're doing this because currently we send data in batches between 25 and 50 records at a time up to NetSuite, wait for NetSuite to process it, and then send it back. And that's worked well for many, many, many years. But we're going to further enhance this now by actually sending that data up to NetSuite, and then all the processing is going to happen in NetSuite. We don't need to wait for that next batch to come down. In fact, you'll even be able to close Excel, close your laptop and go home. And then when you come back the next morning, you can open up your laptop, open Excel, install our add-in, and you'll see a little notification badge that'll say you've got new results. Click on that, and then all that data will stream back into Excel, letting you know which records were updated, which ones weren't updated, etc. So the real theme here is, we're not resting on our laurels. We've got some really smart people that are continuing to enhance this app. We also want to get all of your feedback as well. So if there's a feature that you want to see, reach out to us and make a case for it. And if you can make a good case for it, it's likely to help other people as well. And if it does, then you should see it on our roadmap. So Justine, with that, I'm going to hand it back over to you.
Great, thanks, Chris. So this is just an overview of the pricing. As Chris mentioned, we do have that free edition, which allows for you to use our reporting engine. And then we have two other editions, Personal and Enterprise. And Personal is $900 a year per user, and then Enterprise is $3,000 a year for the first user, and each additional license is $600 a year. So I won't go through all the different features that Enterprise has over Personal, but if anyone has any questions on that, feel free to ask. I'd be more than happy to discuss that one-on-one. And then also we have this special promotion going on that Rico mentioned in the beginning of the call. If you purchase the application by the end of October, you will, and use this promo code BYBYCSV, you'll receive $100 off your first year of the application. So I think it's time now, unless Chris has anything else to say, that we'll open it up for questions.
Great, thank you. We've been getting a lot of questions on the back end here. So Chris and Justine, you ready to take some of these?
Yeah, let's give it a shot. Thank you.
Okay, great. The first question comes from Raquel, and she's asking, is there a way to use one CSV import that will import separate journal entries at once with different dates?
So with the native NetSuite CSV import process, I can't say definitively, but I'm going to say it's very, very likely that you can through native NetSuite CSV. With our application, you definitely can. You can import hundreds of journal entries at the same time. And there's this concept of header level information and detail level information. So as long as there's a break in your header level fields, like the date, then that's going to trigger our app to create a second journal entry, then a third, fourth, et cetera. And you can make those breaks with any header level field. The common one to use is memo.
Okay, great. And she actually had another question too. As far as integrating applications, does that mean that there will be a real-time feed from the applications such as Amazon?
So I think the question is probably around our integrator.io platform and the smart connectors. And so for that, I think we'll take the question offline. I'm going to give my best guess answer. I think you could, with our application, you can schedule how often you want to bring data in from Amazon in as short as every 15 minutes. But Raquel will definitely follow up with you after the call and get you a definitive answer.
Great, thank you. And then Chris had a question. Is there a delete function to mass delete particular records?
There is, and I say that kind of with a word of caution because you want to make sure that you don't give delete permissions out to everyone. And so our application, because we're using NetSuite Web Services, the users choose a role when they sign in, and that if that role has delete permissions, then they can actually do a mass delete, which is pretty handy in a lot of cases. But I do suggest, being cautious about who you want to give that permission to. But certainly, I could, run a save search for sales orders that had a particular item. Maybe it's no longer in stock, and I don't want to inactivate the sales orders. I want to delete them. There's a delete button in our application. I click it, and they're gone.
Okay, great. The next question comes to us from Wendy, and she's asking what happens if another user is in edit mode on a record that you're updating?
It's a good question. So I'm going to answer it hypothetically, and that would be you would actually receive the same message as if two people were editing the record at the same time in the native NetSuite UI. And I think it's going to say another user has updated this transaction, so your edits aren't going to go through. So that same error message will be passed back to our Excel application. You hear me typing here because I'm going to just type a quick note to verify that, and then I'll update you via email after.
Great. And then our next question comes from Sarah. She's wondering how the solution works regarding permissions and restrictions.
Okay, yeah, I mean, that's an excellent question and probably partially answered with the delete permission that I just discussed. So we do, CloudExtend actually uses NetSuite to make all these updates. So if a user doesn't have permission to do something, like before I updated a journal entry that was dated in June, if I didn't have permission to update a journal entry in a historical period, then I would receive an error message in Excel saying that I didn't have adequate permissions to perform that action.
Okay, great, thank you. The next question comes to us from Crystal. Actually, she's asking a question I think I'm seeing a lot of, and we'll make sure I'm answering it for all of you. We are looking for a link to the recording or a copy of the webinar after it's done. We will have a recording. We are recording this right now, and it will be available after the event. So rest assured you can check this out again and share it with other folks within your organization there. The next question to you, Chris, is from Katie. Is CloudExtend required if I want to import Excel files that have multiple sheets?
So, so first the answer is yes, because if you have a CSV file, Excel only saves one sheet. You're only allowed to save one sheet in that CSV file. So with our application, you can have our application loaded on every single one of those workbooks or worksheets inside your workbook, and then interact with your NetSuite data on each one of those tabs, something you can't do with CSV.
Great. Okay, and then let's see. From Greg, does CloudExtend support all NetSuite record types that are supported by NetSuite web services?
So we support a lot more than native CSV import, and typically, so NetSuite has this concept of biannual releases, so 2018.1, 2018.2, et cetera. So we're typically one release behind, almost always. So for example, if NetSuite's on 2018.1, we're typically on 2017.2, and then when 2018. Rolls out, you'll see us supporting all the record types available with 2018.1.
Okay, great. Justine, one of the questions that came in was they want to see the pricing screen again. Would you mind flipping back to that while we answer some more of these questions? Awesome, thank you. One of the other questions here is from Chris, and he's wondering if you recommend, what do you recommend for importing tens of thousands of records?
Sure. So I think I would recommend two options in that case. So one is Celigo's data loader. So you can find that at integrator.io. Set up a free account there. And I mentioned earlier, you can create your own flows for free. So these are automated flows. But within there, you'll also see an option for a data loader. That's a really great tool for kind of one-offs for uploading massive amounts of information. Also, CSV import is a free tool as well. So native's NetSuite CSV import, you could certainly use that as well. And then just kind of monitor the queue as that data is being uploaded. So really two free options there.
Okay, great. The next question is coming from Katie. Is CloudExtend required if I want to import Excel files that have, oh, we just answered that one, silly me. How about from Greg, this is the one I meant. Does CloudExtend support all NetSuite record types that are supported by NetSuite web services?
Okay, so that one too, maybe it was, he might have typed it in twice, that we also just answered that one, and the answer is, yeah, just went through it.
Okay, great. Okay, do you notice any decrease in Excel performance with CloudExtend installed? And this is from Karen.
So from time to time, it depends really on the size of your table. So it's not really from CloudExtend. So we're not impacting any performance on Excel. But if you have, say, a large table with lots of lookup fields on there, then that could definitely impact your performance. So it's really a function of how big your data set is, as well as how many, as the structure of each one of the fields that are loaded on there. So the examples that I was showing, like journal entries and sales orders, are pretty basic, and they're going to have really, next to zero impact on Excel performance. But if you've got some really large tables, which I kind of hinted at, I don't recommend, huge data sets, but you'll definitely see a performance hit on Excel. But we recommend 64-bit Excel. We work with Excel 2016 and higher, and that's really, a pretty decent product. And if you're seeing slowdowns, it shouldn't be because of our application.
Okay, great. Wendy has a couple questions here. One is, does this work on a Mac? And then the second is, can this be used to format and roll out end-of-month financial reporting? Okay,
so the first, yes, it does work on a Mac. So it's the exact same add-in whether you're on a Mac or on a PC. So second, for reporting, we don't support NetSuite reports. So you saw earlier that we have these saved searches, but I do recommend, there's really a great partner out there called Solution 7 that has an integration with NetSuite reports. So you could actually kind of rebuild your financials inside of Excel. It does require that advanced analytics / ODBC driver. So there's a little extra expense on the NetSuite side, but they've really built a great product. So if you're looking to get, financials into Excel, I would definitely recommend talking with Simon over at Solution 7.
Okay, great. Sarah has a couple questions as well here. How do we know who will have access to update which transactions and saved searches? And I think that this is, you talked a little bit about permissions, but maybe you can talk a little bit more specifically about seeing who has that access.
Sure. So the application itself is licensed to end users. So you decide, which end users will have access to the application itself. And then we take it one step further, and not really us because we're using NetSuite's native web services. So because we do that, you can actually look at a record and you can see who's actually made a change to that record. It's all recorded in the system notes, and it'll show that the change was made via web services. So typically, if you see Joe made a change via web services on, September 20th, 2018, then in all likelihood, that's Joe using our application as opposed to the native NetSuite UI.
Okay, great. And then she had a follow-up question to this about what happens with approval workflows if like there's a journal entry is approved and you shouldn't be able to edit it.
Yeah, so the same thing there. So the permissions would apply if that person doesn't have the ability to edit a previously approved journal entry. They'd receive an error message. Now, if they were creating a journal entry that then had to go into some kind of an approval process, that process is still going to run. So you can use this to create, a 200-line journal entry. Then Joe approves it, Jill approves it, et cetera, all the way on up the chain.
Okay, great. From Shane, he asks, in NetSuite, I can tie specific fields such as department to external IDs when importing via the CSV, and he's wondering if he can do that as well using CloudExtend.
Yes, we do actually support internal IDs and external IDs. So if you wanted to say use an internal ID instead of an actual item name, you would just use 2 left brackets, the internal ID, and then 2 right brackets, and it's kind of a similar process for external IDs.
Okay, and then another question from Katie, is it possible to integrate with Google Docs?
So I'll make a forward-looking statement and say that that's on our roadmap for 2019. You can keep your eye out for it. We don't have an integration yet between Google Sheets and NetSuite. We do have a really cool integration, though, between Google Docs and NetSuite in the sense that you can replace the NetSuite file cabinet with Google Drive, and that's part of our Google of our CloudExtend G Suite integration. And we can actually share with you some of that information via a separate email as well. And you can all see it at cloudextend.io.
Okay, great. And then from Shane, are custom records and custom segments supported?
Yes and yes.
Great. I'm telling you, we're getting lots and lots of questions here. So I've got some support here helping me in the background answering some of these questions. Some of them will take live, and some of them, if just depending on your question, some of them you'll be seeing the answer pop up in that Q&A window as well. So a question from Shane comes in: can I build a template as a user and share it with other users for easy imports, or does each user need to build a template?
The answer is yes, you can, and the way we share is actually pretty cool. We had a lot of discussions about this, and I said earlier, there's lots of smart people here. So one guy, Samira, came up with this concept of allowing you to load a template onto your Excel workbook, and then when you share that workbook with the template loaded, anybody else that opens that workbook that also has a CloudExtend Excel for NetSuite license can then interact with it, and then they could even save it to their local template repository if they wanted to. So it's as simple as sharing a workbook with the template loaded on it, then anyone can start working with it. You could even make that template part of not to confuse the two, but you could make that CloudExtend Excel template workbook an Excel template as well, so someone can do File New and then open that templatized workbook as well.
Okay, great. From Chris, CSV mapping templates have required fields. Does this function add more options for identifying records? For example, customer name and number instead of external or internal ID?
It doesn't, and it's kind of a challenge that we have as well. There is talk of adding that. I know we have the concept on our roadmap. We haven't actually taken the time to solve it yet, but it's something we've heard from lots of customers. So our answer for now, we even have got a help document assigned to this, is we give you a help doc that shows you how to look at a NetSuite record and see which fields are required, and then you have to kind of go back and forth to make sure you get it right. Now, the good thing is once you've nailed it, you save that template, you don't need to do it again, but it is a bit of a process to make sure you have all the required fields.
Okay, great. And then a question came in from Bruce, wondering if it works also with custom fields.
It does, yes. So it works with custom fields and custom records.
Great. Okay, and then from Sarah, are custom segments and multi-book supported?
So custom segment is supported, and I have to think. I'm not sure exactly what we mean by multi-book. So I'll have to research that and take it offline. I'm not sure if it means like NetSuite One World, if there is multiple segments or multiple subsidiaries. Odds are yes, but I'll take it offline, do a little research on multiple book. I'll do that today and get back to you.
Okay, great. Let's see, just going through and making sure we've gotten most of the questions here, seeing if there's any others that pop up. So one of the others was, how do I install the app?
It's probably easier to show. Justine, or could you guys just let me share my screen again really quick? It's
Absolutely.
available from the Microsoft Office store, and I can share my screen and show you in like 20 seconds here.
There you go.
Okay, great. So simply load Excel and then click on Insert and then click on Store. And that's going to bring you to the Microsoft Store. And then from there, you can search for Celigo or you can search for CloudExtend. And when you do, you'll see our two applications. We've got CloudExtend Excel for Salesforce and for NetSuite. Just click Add, and then you'll be asked for your name, email address, etc. And then at that point, you're given a license and a 14-day trial.
Very cool. And then can the app be used in sandbox accounts?
It can. So that's one of the differentiating factors between our Enterprise Edition and our Personal Edition. So if you need to use it perpetually in the sandbox, then you'd want to license our Enterprise Edition. But if you just want to use it for testing, you do have full access to sandbox and production accounts during the trial period.
Okay, great. So I think that concludes our session today. I think that we've gotten through the questions. There was a question about the free version and the 14-day trial. Actually, it says, can you want to talk a little bit about the free version, actually, Chris?
Yeah, sure. So in order to get the free version, you do go through our 14-day trial. So on my screen here, you'd want to actually go to the Microsoft Office store, install the add-in. Over 14 days, you can use all of the features for free. And then after 14 days, you'll still be able to use the application, but you'll be restricted to streaming in your saved searches. So there's a free trial for 14 days. After that, the application is free for the running your saved searches. And then if you want to use it to upsert data, back up to NetSuite, et cetera, then you'd want to pay for it.
Perfect. Awesome. Thank you very much for answering all those questions. I want to thank everybody for joining us today. This was a great session. We really appreciated all of your great questions, and we'll be following up with you on these as well. So if you do have any questions, feel free to reach out to us. I want to thank Chris and Justine for sharing their information with us today, and just want to say have a wonderful day. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.